With only 9 days remaining to Kenya 50 celebrations, and with only 23 days remaining before we celebrate Christmas, and with only 29 days remaining before we usher in the new year 2014 and say goodbye to 2013, a very good morning to you wherever you are watching us from, and welcome to the program Good Morning Kenya on this second day of December, the year 2013. My name is Martin Mwanje, and this morning we want to look at matters quality and access to education in urban informal settlements in the country. I remember just the other day the African Population and Health Research Center here in Nairobi was releasing a report, and it is titled Quality and Access to Education in Urban Informal Settlements, a report that did paint some grim statistics when it comes to how teachers comprehend the subject matter that they teach in schools. And to help us understand the contents of that report and what they do is Mr. Ngware. He's the head of education program at Africa Health and Africa Population and Health Research Center here in Nairobi. Mr. Ngware, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Martin.
Remember, if you have any question for Mr. Ngware, the number is so simple. Our SMS platform are now scrolling down your screen. You can just reach us via those platforms, and we'll be more than glad to pose those questions to Mr. Ngware. African Population and Health Research Center, what do you do specifically?
At the African Population and Health Research Center, we do research in Sub-Saharan Africa, particularly focusing on the social sciences. For example, we do work in education, we do research work in health. We also do research work in population dynamics, as well as urbanization and well-being. Yes. And
I realized that you are the head of education program.
Yes, I lead the education research program at the center. Yes.
And because you lead the education program, and we're talking about urban settlements, informal settlements, that is, how is the situation when it comes to education matters?
Yes, thank you, Martin, for that. We've done research work in urban informal settlements since 2005, particularly in Nairobi, but from 2010 onwards, we've gone outside Nairobi. In Kenya, we've gone to some counties. For example, we've been to Murang'a, we've been to Garissa, we've been to Kisii, we've been to Baringo. But apart from looking at what is happening in schools in rural areas, we've also gone to more urban informal settlements. We've been to Nyeri informal settlements, we've been to Mombasa informal settlements, we've been to Kisumu, we've been to Nakuru, we've been to Eldoret. And what we do is we look at the issues of access, we look at the issues of quality. What I mean by access is the children from the informal settlements being able to access free primary education, being able to access other alternative education. When we talk about quality, we are talking about what is happening in the classroom. We look at how the teachers are teaching, we look at how well the teachers are doing in the classroom, we look at the teacher content, teacher knowledge in terms of the content area, in terms of the teaching styles, and we also look at how the children in the informal settlement are actually doing in terms of learning outcomes. So we assess them particularly in numeracy and literacy, and in the work that we do, we try to compare where they are coming from and the levels of achievement.
I presuppose, let's start also by defining terms here. When we talk about urban informal settlements, what do we specifically mean?
The urban informal settlement, we look at, if you've seen the reports that were released much earlier by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. The Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, when they are doing census, they do define what is a slum. It's the same one that we are calling informal settlements, but they also call it a slum. And they have a definition and the characteristics of what constitutes a slum. And in Kenya, for example, and in Nairobi, if you look at, if I may give an example, like Ikorogocho, like Ifuandani, like Kibera, Mathare, all those are described by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics as slums. Those are the informal settlements that we go to, and we carry our work there.
Yeah. You did indicate that you did your first research in 2006 or thereabouts. And about 7 years down the line, what will you say that has changed in terms of the research you did, the findings you did, and of course you made recommendations? what has happened between 2006 and 2013 October, when you were releasing the Quality and Access to Education in Urban Informal Settlements report. Is there any significant improvement in recommendations that you've been making all along?
Yes. We started doing our research work in urban informal settlements in 2005. And we collected retrospective data dating up to 2000. And we tried to assess the impact of free primary education on access as of that time. And one of the key things that came up was in 2002, 2003, when the free primary education was introduced, we find that about 65% of the children living in informal urban settlements in Nairobi, particularly Korogocho and Viwandani, were attending government schools. 65%, that's about two-thirds. And that's a very good indication of the success of the FP program. Now, over time, we've seen some dynamics. We've seen some shifts from government schools to non-government schools, particularly the low-cost private schools. And by 2010, we found that about 39% of the children who are coming from the poor households were actually attending government schools, meaning the rest, about 61%, were not in government schools. They were not benefiting from free primary education. By 2012, when we did this study, and this study covered more slums than just Viwandani and Korogocho. It covered slums in Mombasa, it covered slums in Eldoret, in Nyeri, in Nakuru, in Kisumu. And what we found was about 53% are actually attending government schools, meaning 47% in all those urban areas, in all those informal settlements, were not being captured under the free primary education program. If you see on Nairobi alone, the proportion is much higher than that. In Nairobi, the proportion is 63%. Looking at, again, only focusing on those two urban informal settlements. So you can see the dynamics and the changes. And what we are saying here is these children are coming from poor urban households. The government does not have enough number of schools in those urban informal settlements. You know, they are overcrowded. We don't have space. Now, the option, or one of the options that could be explored, is to go it in terms of public-private partnerships, where actually the government should support those low-cost private schools. The target here should be the children, not necessarily the school, because when you target the schools and these are business, you could argue that they are private entities, then there could be issues of how public funds are being used to support private investments. But we are saying, well, that's fine, but then you could target actually the households and the children themselves so that they can be facilitated and supported to actually receive quality education in those areas. So that is as far as the access issues are concerned. But we've also looked at the issues of quality and what is happening in the classroom. And one of the things that we find here is the kind of teaching styles that are being used by teachers who are teaching in those schools is actually not what one would have expected, given that some of them have gone through training, although a very big proportion, like 59% in low-cost schools, have not gone through training. But we find that those styles of teaching do not actually enhance learning among learners the way we would expect, because most of them are teacher-centered. They are not what we would call cooperative learning or things like a group styles of learning and that kind of thing, which are well known to actually enhance learning.
What styles are they using?
What you find, for example, in a typical mathematics lesson, okay, you would find like 46 to 50% of the lesson time. This is a lesson of about 35 minutes. The teacher actually uses that time to check what the learners are doing. The teacher walks into the classroom, asks one or two questions in terms of a recap of what was happening in the previous lesson. Then he or she moves to give some examples on the blackboard, which is good, finds out or evaluates whether the learners have actually understood, and then gives the learners some tasks. Then the teacher goes loud to the classroom trying to mark and assisting the ones that are being left behind. But you find another proportion of about 15 to 20%, the teacher is actually using what we call teacher-centered activities, meaning there is no interaction between the teacher and the learner. Another 37 to 40% is being spent on what we call transition activities. Now, what are transition activities? For example, the teacher is looking for his textbook, for his pen, is opening the locker, is closing the door, there is interruption from outside. That 80 to 40% is a very big proportion of a lesson, and we think that that time could actually be used in other activities that actually or directly influence learning. Yeah.
Do they still schedule mathematics in the afternoon? Because there are those who used to complain, how do you put mathematics in the afternoon? It should be in the morning, during morning hours, so that the rate of comprehension is high.
Yes, I think there is a policy in the ministry that certain subjects are taught at certain times, and what we found is that they actually, almost all the schools are actually conforming to that policy. So we did not find any lesson, mathematics lesson that was being taught in the afternoon. Most of them are being taught in the morning.
When you talk about 59% of teachers being untrained, what may be perpetuating or catalyzing this kind of trend, where we're just having a high number of teachers being untrained, and there are people catering for the needs of these young ones?
You see, Martin, in the low-cost schools, parents are actually paying the salaries of these teachers. And getting a trained teacher or employing a trained teacher is more expensive than employing an untrained teacher. That's one. Secondly, you find that those low-cost schools actually get the best of those who completed their fourth year in secondary schools before they go to the university. They also employ graduate students who are, for example, have just completed the university and they are looking for employment elsewhere. And having that kind of an arrangement, a temporary employment, allows those schools to actually pay low salaries. And because of that, you end up with most teachers being untrained in those areas. If they were to employ trained teachers, yes, it is good, but it would also cost them a lot. Of course, what we are recommending is, whatever the case, I think the best way to go is to have trained teachers in those low-cost schools. And this is why we are saying if the government could step in and support, and that's one of the areas and one of the benefits that if those schools were to be brought under the radar of the Ministry of Education, that's one of the areas that they would benefit from.
But why will you go for untrained teachers when I know there are so many trained teachers but who are unemployed? They may be willing to serve in those schools if approached.
They go for those low-cost schools because of trying to bring down the costs. As you are aware, for example, if you look at the budget for the Ministry of Education, the bulk of it goes to teacher salaries. Okay? And the same thing happens even in the low-cost schools. The bulk of it goes to paying teacher salaries, but they try to bring the costs down, and otherwise then they'll be forced to charge very high fees. And if they do that, then you would find high dropouts among children who are attending those schools, and then that will not be very, very good in the environment in which they work in.
And is the government aware that these untrained teachers, 59% in informal settlements, are doing this?
Yes, the government is very much aware. We've shared with them this report. It was positively taken by the Ministry of Education, and I think they are doing something about it. Yes.
When you talk about low-cost private schools, one will ask, what are you talking about? Because I know private schools that are charging, that's in primary, as much as 40,000 per term. Low-cost primary schools, private schools, what do you mean?
Okay, let me give you a snapshot of the kind of fees that these schools charge, or the schools in the informal settlements charge. We have three types of schools in the informal settlements. There is the government schools, primary schools, as we know them. There is also what we are calling formal private primary schools. We are calling them formal private primary schools because they are registered by the Ministry of Education, but then they are found or they are located within the informal settlements. But apart from those two, we have what we are now calling low-cost private schools. Now, the low-cost private schools charge the lowest within that categorization of the non-government schools, the low-cost schools actually charge the lowest. They charge about 1,800 on average per year, and they allow the parents to actually pay even 20 shillings per week, even 50 shillings per month. You can even pay 10 shillings per day, and that kind of flexibility allows the parents to actually take their children there and be able to clear the fee by the end of the year. The government schools again the private schools, the low-cost schools charge 3,000. The government schools charge 1,800 over and above the 12, the about 10-20 that they get from the government. But these are not illegal fees, as it were. I think these are fees that are normally sanctioned by the committees. The former private schools charge about 11,000. So these are not the high-cost schools that we are used to, that you find in upmarket places. Not really. When you talk about a fee of 3,000 spread across the whole year, and that the parent is allowed to pay even on a daily basis 10 shillings or a weekly basis, or that kind of flexibility then allows the parents to be able to cope with that kind of a system.
And still, of course, talking about untrained teachers as well, one of the findings of this report that you are releasing, I believe a week ago, was that the teachers who teach some of these subjects don't understand the subject matter, and indeed some of them failed some of your tests. That sounds scaring, is it not?
Not really scaring, but it's an issue to be concerned about. You see, if you look at the pre-training program in Kenya, the primary school teacher pre-service program, what happens is once students finish grade 4, or what we call Form 4, they are selected to join primary teacher training college. Previously, you would have people who are going in there for training with D, meaning grade of D, meaning grade of C minus, meaning grade of C. Now, these trainees have got various subjects that they are going to be trained on, and they are trained in about 5 subjects. Sometimes you cannot be good in all those subjects. You may have failed in some, and you may have done well in some. But then when you get into the training, you are trained in all those 5 subjects. When you leave the training, you are posted to a school to go and teach all those 5 subjects. Now, if it happened that, let's say you got a D in mathematics, you may want to agree with me that that may not be the best person to go and teach mathematics. But that person may have scored a B or something in another subject that he or she is good in, and we think that that is the subject that that person should be going out there to teach. Now, coming back to our study, what we did was we assessed the teachers in their content knowledge, the mathematics content knowledge, and also the knowledge of the teaching style, what we call in teaching jargon pedagogy. Now, what we found was about a third of the students that we interviewed in the schools that we went to were actually being taught mathematics by teachers who scored less than 40% in that test. And we think that those teachers do not really demonstrate that they actually know mathematics. We think that those are not really poor teachers. No, those teachers can be able to teach another subject, but not mathematics. And the recommendation here is that we need to go back to the entry qualifications as you recruit them to go for training, so that you only allow, for example, those who score a C+ or above in a certain subject to actually be allowed to go and teach that subject.
So what you want is benchmarking, so that anything below C+, you cannot go for training as a teacher.
I do not think that if you score less than C+ in a certain subject that you should actually be allowed to go and teach that subject. No.
But generally speaking, as in the entry point to colleges at ETC, we are saying that less than C+, you should not be admitted.
That's the recommendation that we are actually making in this report, that if you scored less than C+ in a certain subject, then you should not go in to be trained to go and teach that subject. Yes. We know that it's going to be a little challenging because it's not something that you can wake up and start tomorrow. It is something that needs to be rolled out gradually because of the implication. Right now, we've seen that stakeholders are talking about the teacher shortages, and we won't want to recommend something that would again make that problem be more acute. What we are recommending is a rollout that will allow a phasing out of those who are not competent, and also trying to bring in some specialization within the teaching of primary school subject. Right now it's not being practiced. We only specialize in secondary school. In secondary school they teach 2 or 3 subjects. In primary school they teach up to 5. You teach any subject that you are trained to teach, whether you are qualified in it or not. And what we are saying here is to change that, or to raise the quality of education in primary schools. We need to think in that direction.
But one will say specialization, while it's a good idea, but look at maybe the government is trying to use it to deal with the shortage of teachers that we are currently witnessing. We are talking about a deficit of close to 70,000.
That's fine, and this is why we are pointing out, we are saying it needs to be rolled out gradually, okay? The point is, what would be the alternative, okay? What would be the implication of not having a qualified teacher in the classroom? We are talking about Vision 2030, we are talking about science and technology, and we are talking about a teacher teaching mathematics, and you are talking about, you want children who are coming out of the system who understands mathematics. We want mathematics stars. You are not going to get mathematics stars if you are going to be taught by a person who is not qualified to teach mathematics. I think that's the point that we are making. Much as we recognize that this one can easily, if not well thought of, can easily cause other problems. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And did you just get a problem in mathematics alone?
In this particular study, we only assessed teachers in mathematics. Again, we are not saying that this is the only area where there are problems. And going forward, I think it would be important to look at other areas as well. But for this study, we only focused on mathematics. Mm-hmm. Yes.
What are the chances that some of these recommendations then are going to be implemented by the government? Because more often than not, we see them, you do them, you make these fine reports, but we don't see them acted upon.
What I would say is, recently we've seen an appreciation of research evidence by government and government institutions. Mm-hmm. And this is why, for example, they would come and they would give you a hearing to share with them this kind of report. This is again why, for example, you would find the Ministry of Education coming to launch this kind of a report. So I think there is a lot of goodwill in the government in terms of using research evidence to actually inform their decisions as well as policy. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Did you also, in your research, focus on something to do with tuition?
Yes, we did look at the tuition. I know tuition is a big issue in Kenya, and the ministry have also got a position and a policy in as far as the tuition is concerned. But what we found in our study is both the government schools as well as non-government schools practice that element of tuition in the same proportion, in the same way. You would say that it is preserve of the non-government schools. No. I think it's being practiced, and it's being driven, and it's being driven by the parents themselves because they demanded it. And I can tell you why. We have these high-stakes exams that we do at the end of grade 8 or at the end of the Form 4. And these exams determine a lot in terms of certifying the learner and in terms of the next direction that student is going to take. So because of that, there is a lot of weight that is placed on those summative exams. So parents then go for tuition. Teachers also go for tuition because they would want the school to look good when the students pass. But we know that sometimes when you have tuition, learning may not be taking place because it could be a question of drilling. And what we recommend in this report is that we need to learn away, we need to move away from examination and go to assessment. Assessment and examinations are different. What we find in our system lacking is assessment, because assessment helps to tell you the quality of education and diagnose the problems, and it can give you feedback so that you can be able to improve the system. Exams don't, because the exams you do them at the end of the system and it's too late. You can't do anything. If I find that the learners at grade 8 are no longer able to do mathematics, I cannot take them back. It's too late. But when you do assessment and you do them early in the system, then you are able to fix the problems.
So you have no 100%, you do not have a lot of problems with tuition?
I have a problem with the tuition. What I don't have a problem with is what we call remedial teaching. Remedial teaching is when you have, you see, if you are running 100 meters, there are those who will run very fast, like our friends, and there are those who lag behind. So what do you do with those who lag behind? You can't leave them, you have to coach them. You have to mentor them so that they can achieve the standard that you want. We call that remedial. It is different from tuition, because tuition, you take them to drill them to pass a certain exam that you have in mind. That's
after the normal school term?
Weekends, holidays, after the students have, after 5 o'clock when the students have, this is different from the homework. After 5 o'clock, instead of the students going home, we have to let children to be children. Okay, so tuition really needed to be, we need to think again about it. If it's a question of we wanted to support what we call slow learners, that's fine, and that is remedial teaching, and it should be done within something that is structured, something that is not calling for business, something that is not calling for parents again to come back and pay. What we want and what I would discourage is the tendency where as a teacher, I have this work to do, I don't do it, but I want to do it during the weekend or in the evening or during the holidays for pay. And I think that one I would have issues with. But in terms of providing students with after-school support in the areas that they are not good at, remedial teaching, I have no problem with that.
Because there are those who argue that some of this remedial teaching you're talking about, and which is charged in some schools, and even tuition, that there some teachers will just become reluctant, knowing that at the end of the day there's going to be something in terms of payment. So you take it slow, you don't want to finish the syllabus, so that at the end of the day you can make something.
Well, the schools where we went to, we don't have evidence that shows that that's what the teachers are doing. But we know that, yes, tuition, there is tuition, and the parents are paying for it, and the students are paying for it, and it is being done outside the school time. But what we are proposing here is, yes, remedial teaching should be there, and ideally remedial teaching is not supposed to be changed, because that is the normal work that we actually employ the teacher to do. That's what the teacher is actually being paid to do. The teacher is not being paid to teach, for example, the A students. He or she is also supposed to help the D students to improve his or her grades. And for him or her to do that, then you'll have to put in remedial teaching. And I do believe that the teachers actually do remedial teaching, although we do have cases where then the issue of tuition comes in, and that spoils, and sometimes we forget that there are some teachers who are actually doing very well and doing the remedial teaching, and they are not charging, because we focus so much on the ones that are actually charging.
Yes. And so lastly, even as we bring this debate to an end, we've talked about low-cost private schools, we talked about the education in informal settlements, quality and access. What will be your final words in terms of how better we can improve the situation in an informal settlement when it comes to education matters?
I think the government has done very well in terms of access to primary education. And I think now we need to focus more on what is happening in the classroom. Students spend more than 2/3 of their time in the classroom, and therefore focusing on the quality of education is the key thing. And one way to do that is to actually support and mentor and coach the teacher on the teaching styles, right inside the classroom, not in the workshops, right inside the classroom. And also we needed to start measuring what the teachers are doing in the classroom in terms of having annual goals that actually can be measured, so that we can be able to see that this year I've been managed to take the students who are scoring D and they are now scoring C+. Not a question of this year I've been able to complete the syllabus or the scheme of work. No, I've been able to move students who were scoring D, they can now score a C+ in certain skills. That kind of measuring learning goals would be what I think would help us to improve the quality of education in the classrooms. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for getting time to speak to us on KBC Channel 1. This is Good Morning Kenya.
Thank you very much, Martin, for having me in this show.
Yes, Mr. Moses Ngware is the head of Education Program Research at Africa Population and Health Research Center here in Nairobi. And yes, they're doing that good work in terms of trying to ensure that the education standards in informal settlements remain up to date with the ever-changing trends. After the short break that I'm about to take, I'll be speaking to two Catholic sisters here who are in studio and saying they're ready to go in terms of engaging me in whatever we'll be discussing about. So stay tuned to see what is it we'll be talking about. See you after this short break.